Why did EA Sports Big disappear? You know, sports games often play it safe, especially if we're talking about traditional sports like football, baseball, American football, basketball. Those types of games generally aim for realism, simulation, stats, updated rosters, and most recently are riddled with microtransactions. And then there was EA Sports Big, a label that injected pure arcade fun and adrenaline into sports games, creating franchises that I absolutely loved like SSX and NBA Street, a label that defied many expectations, including my own, and that had a meteoric rise and a huge fall. But if we want to understand the story behind EA Big's demise, then we need to go back to the beginning. And it actually all starts with an initiative at EA called the Silver Bullet Initiative. This encouraged artistic freedom and meant that designers who had worked on successful games were given the chance to create a brand new IP.
Nicest piece of work I ever done, I think.
In comes Steve Rechtschaffner. Now, he'd worked on some of the early FIFA games. He was a producer on FIFA Soccer 96, and as a result was given the chance to work on something new. So what did he create? Well, it wasn't an EA Big sports game. It was actually Triple Play 97, a follow-up to a baseball game franchise. And we won't spend too much time talking about it, but what's important is that the franchise did really well. And this gave Steve another chance to go for a brand new IP again. And this is where Rechtschaffner's personality really shone through, and he took his first risk, delivering SSX, originally planned for the Sega Dreamcast, and when that deal fell through, Sony came in with PlayStation, and snowboarding history was forever changed. EA Sports Big was born through this. You see, SSX wasn't just a snowboarding game. It was over the top. It was an arcade thrill ride, which most importantly didn't fit in or match the rest of the EA Sports aesthetic. So they decided a new sub-label was needed, and boom, there we have EA Sports Big. EA Sports. And they didn't stop at creating one absolute banger, no. Next, in 2001, they popped out my favourite big franchise, and a huge success for the label, NBA Street. This was quickly followed with SSX Tricky. Now, this was mainly a reskin of the first SSX game, but it was an incredibly fun reskin and arguably my favourite game in the franchise. I know other people will argue that, but if I want to pick up a controller and quickly have a race, SSX Tricky is the one I think of. The soundtrack, the characters, the tricks, it's all embedded in my head more than a decade after I first played it. And whilst SSX was getting ported to every console imaginable, and even for some reason a snowboard that didn't require a console and plugged directly into your TV, EA Big were still chucking out a load of really amazing games. In 2003 we got Jam Vendetta, essentially a super fun virtual pro wrestling reskin which fused hip hop and wrestling together, featuring Def Jam legends like Scarface, DMX, Ghostface Killer, Method Man, Ludacris, Redman, and many more. Funnily enough, when this came out, I only knew who a handful of those rappers were, and I didn't really understand the importance of a lot of those rappers to hip-hop culture and the history of hip-hop altogether. So this is one of the games that I liked when it came out, but I've almost grown to love more as I've got older and grown to listen to a lot of the people featured in the game. And this game was followed up by one of my favourite games ever, and I've talked about it on the channel before, NBA Street Volume 2, which I actually recently picked up and featured in the last video. This is a game I spent so many hours playing, and I love everything about it, from the aesthetics to the commentator and the soundtrack, and a lot of other people really love the game too. It really stood out as one of the classics from EA Big Sports.
And if you don't know, now you know.
Then came SSX 3 and open world levels. Teenage me had his head blown. It seems like absolutely nothing today, where so many games have huge open worlds, and sometimes you actually wish they had less open world and more content, right? But back then, this wasn't a thing. And I'm sure a lot of people would say that SSX 3 is their favourite game in the franchise, and I can't really argue with them if it wasn't for the pure nostalgia I have of SSX Tricky. 100% SSX 3 changed the gaming landscape and was a sign of what was to come. Kind of. Because it's definitely not to say that every EA big game was a huge hit. You've got games like Shocks, Sledstorm, Freakstyle, all of which you can pick up, play, and they're good fun, but essentially miss the mark in trying to be an SSX replica and lacked a lot of the personality compared to the label's standout games. And if you're wondering why, it's because Steve Rechtschaffner, despite helping start EA Sports Big, wasn't directly involved in every game. And in fact, it actually seems like he was telling people that things were going wrong in the development of some of the games. In an interview years after he'd left EA Sports Big, he said, "I was feeding back to that group saying, look, you're building the whole world around physics that really shouldn't be locked down yet. You can't do that. Because if you finally find your physics and change it, it probably won't fit your world." So he obviously had a vision for how these games should be developed and how they should look and how it should all tie together. And when he wasn't around, it seems that some of it broke down a little bit. And that's obviously not to say that everything Steve touched was somehow amazing. He did work on the game I mentioned, Sledstorm, although that's an interesting one because it's actually a follow-up to a PlayStation 1 game that wasn't an EA Sports Big game and had a good following, did fairly well. But obviously, you can't get them all right. And what's interesting is that SSX 3 actually turned out to be Steve's last game at EA Sports Big. He actually headed on to Black Box Games to work on the Need for Speed franchise, and that franchise that he worked on was also full of absolute bangers, which we'll cover in another video. But what we'll call the Steve Rechtschaffner Formula, when that was followed, Big still managed to pump out some good games even after he'd left. Both NFL Street and FIFA Street, which I've picked up for the PS2 collection, were incredible games and were really fun. NBA Street 3 was great. NFL Street 2 and FIFA Street 2, they were still pretty fun. And then came NBA Street Home Court, FIFA Street 3, NFL Street 3, and this is where it almost seems like we're regressing a little bit. This is getting a bit boring. The mechanics aren't as good. You've taken away a bunch of the fun stuff. Why are you going more realistic again? Why are you losing the vision that was making EA Big so great in the first place?
Everybody loves me.
You've got things like a Wii exclusive called SSX Blur, which I don't even understand why they did. I can't even remember what SSX Tour was like because I think I got bored within the first hour and would much rather load SSX 3 or SSX Tricky if I wanted that sort of gameplay. In my opinion, it was Steven Rechtschaffner and his vision that made EA Big as good as they were, and deviating from that vision killed them off. Rechtschaffner himself said in an interview, "I think we could have had an enduring brand had it not fallen into the need to put out a bunch of games that weren't ready. That's one thing Nintendo never does. In some ways, I think what we created was a product of its time, but I think we also helped to define the times, and I think there's values there that are timeless, and those are the ones that inspire me." So he basically outlines there the reason he left. They were trying to push out games before they were ready, and this really didn't align with the vision that he had for these games. And I think he made the right choice, obviously gutting for EA Sports Big. In 2007, EA had a change in leadership and they got new people in who wanted things done the normal way. Normal sports games with none of that weird shit.
If you want to rock, you gotta break the rules.
Along with the global financial crisis the year after, EA decided to close down a bunch of its experimental projects, and that was it. Bye bye, EA Sports Big. Like, subscribe, do all that good stuff, and I'll catch you next time.